Fans of the Souls games can rejoice as their beloved genre is as vibrant as ever and not going anywhere anytime soon. With the Dark Souls series having multiple versions of each game spanning across 2 and what will likely be 3 generations, different twists to the formula with Bloodborne and Sekiro, and plenty of quality games from other developers that scratch a similar itch like Nioh and Code Vein. Souls-like games are a staple subgenre of the action RPG video game world. If you're a fan of it, this is a great time to be alive, as many more games of this variety are assuredly planned and on their way in the coming years. One of, if not the genre's most notable upcoming game that we're aware of, is none other than Elden Ring. The game is hotly anticipated for many reasons. Not only is it from the wizards themselves at From Software, directed by the master himself, Hidetaka Miyazaki, who directed Bloodborne, Sekiro, Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 3, but it's also being co-written by George R.R. Martin, the man behind Game of Thrones, as well as a few Twilight Zone episodes. Clearly an interesting mix that seems like it could wind up conceiving a rather unique world and cast of characters. With Martin's style of multi-layered cerebral stories, surely something interesting is in the oven right now over at From. But what's going on with it? Well, here's what we know so far. While Martin was largely given full control to create the game's world and driving mythologies, Miyazaki will be handling much of the game's narrative and how the game's characters interact and affect it. Miyazaki has described the process by comparing it to using a dungeon master's handbook as a foundation to create his own story. And if that particular choice of analogy doesn't tell you all you need to know about the general direction of this game, nothing will. With that being the case, it should come as no surprise that the dark fantasy aesthetic that permeates the Souls games will also be present here, with all the labyrinthian castles and dungeons you would expect, albeit perhaps a different shade with the influence of Martin coloring the overall picture. Many elements of Elden Ring will probably still be fairly familiar to Dark Souls fans though, as the world is going to be one of ruin, despair, and will project a vague feeling of past cataclysms at every turn. The size of the world seems to be shaping up to be much larger and more open than previous From games, which will be a nice change of pace from the largely semi-open but still linear style of most of their previous games. Traversal will be emphasized on a new level for them, with horseback riding being part of the experience. The soundtrack will also apparently be composed by the same lead composer and team behind most of From's recent projects, so we should likely expect the same general realm of dark, booming low tones and massive echoey percussion that drove most of those soundtracks. So, while we're pretty clear on the genre and general tone that the game is basically aiming for, we still don't really know much else. What will the characters be like? What are their individual goals? What will the gameplay be like? Will combat be more tactical, conservative, and defense-oriented like the Souls games? Or will it lean more towards rewarding aggression, reflex, and hostility like Bloodborne? Or perhaps some new ratio of the two we haven't seen yet? Or a totally new emphasis altogether? These are all fairly reasonable questions to have a year after the game was announced that we just plain don't have the answers to. We can certainly make some logical deductions, but speculation is all it would be at this point with such little hard data to go on. But why is this? While it's true that big-budget games take their time with rolling out information like this, Elden Ring does seem to have gone quite a bit of time with basically nothing new for us to learn. One could suspect that there are some rational reasons for this lack of information, with Miyazaki collaborating with a completely different writer of similar stature in his field. It wouldn't be far-fetched to imagine that there's quite a bit of alteration, compromise, and revision going on between the two of them. This is common with meaningful collaborations, and definitely not a sign of trouble in and of itself, but Rather, just a sign that this process is different and slower than one that involves a more centralized creative process that relies more on one person or team that already has a well-established workflow. Any changes to the lore that Martin suggests would potentially trigger a change to the game's real-time narrative for Miyazaki, and would thus require him to either alter his work accordingly or shoot it down. This works in the opposite direction too, as Miyazaki could, and probably has, come up with a few things that might need Martin to alter his vision. It's all part of the creative process, but seeing as how this is their first time working together in this way, it's probably safe to assume that the road to a finished product for this game is going to be a longer one if the car is going to have two drivers. With that being the case, From Software would be smart to use a very conservative approach to rolling out too much detail about specifics. If too much is revealed and things change behind the scenes, it could put From Software and Bandai Namco in an awkward position of having to spend time explaining why things will be different at launch than they were previously being described, instead of just selling the game and making the case for its existence. So, while the slow, almost non-existent rollout of information might leave you scratching your head at first, with all this in mind, it does make more sense. It's better to be too careful about what they say at this point than not careful enough. And From has clearly gotten the memo on that, while the esteemed Souls developer is clearly taking their time with talking about Elden Ring. This is not a situation where we have much to fear about a hellish development cycle or from rushing the game out in an unfinished state. This is one of the most well-oiled game development machines in the business. From Kingsfield to Armored Core to Demon's Souls to Sekiro, this developer has shown nothing other than a steady record of putting out multiple fantastic experiences every single generation for many years now, with basically no lulls in quality or quantity. So, there's no real reason to think they've randomly lost their touch and something horrible is going on with Elden Ring. If you're somebody that thinks this game is aimed at you, odds are it probably is. But, much like the combat of their games requiring you to wait for the right moment to strike your enemy, the release of this next game will likely be a brilliant reward for those who are patient. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.